was my childhood. I had a suicidal manic depression father through most of my childhood because my father in his 50s walked away from what he spent a life building
Yeah,
to becoming a janitor after being an engineer in northern
that's
Quebec.
crazy.
It is crazy, but it makes you really understand the world from different dimensions, right? So, but I never saw the life as what I was going to become. It's
Yeah.
like I had.
On five, four, three, two, one. Hey guys, welcome back to the Way Podcast with your host Sajid Marwar. Today we have a very special guest, a professor of mine, and somebody I've always wanted to learn more about. I hear all these legendary stories of her career and all these sorts of things. And yes, I'm proud to welcome Professor Inez Blackburn onto the Way Podcast. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming
It's
on.
good to be here. Thank you.
Yes, Professor Blackburn is not only a professor, an accomplished author, has multiple degrees, has been working in marketing and consumer behavior, consumer packaged good, like so many different fields. If you check her LinkedIn, it's very stacked. I will say, I'll say that. Yeah. And yeah, today I wanted to talk about a few different topics, but why don't we just start off on how you came to this position in life you right now? How did you choose this path of, I guess, pursuing marketing, consumer behavior, these specific fields? Was there any point
I,
where,
I think you have to go back to 1996.
okay,
So what happened was, I had been working in the marketing field for quite a few years before then. Undergrad was like a business BCom degree. And I was working as an analyst, forecasting demand, financial analyst, category management analyst, things like that. But I always felt in my undergraduate degree, I wanted to be taught by people that had practical experience in the field. So one of my goals upon graduation was to get up to that VP level and then go back to teach.
wow,
So that's what I did. So prior to working at C Square and MIT, which was a research component of the university where we would work with the private sector and we would take data and we'd model it, point of sale data, to be able to more accurately forecast demand. That's what I was doing. But prior to that, I got to that level of VP of marketing at Comp Beverages and was launching global private label brands around the world. So offering a complete private label turnkey solution for retail, everything from beverages to cake mixes to potato chips to you name it, and got to travel. But what happened was I was a new mom. My daughter was quite young. And so I was away from home 60 to 70% of the time. So my husband was like a single parent. And the environment where I worked was absolutely toxic. It was insane. Like I had a bag packed 24/7 because anytime, my boss, Dave Nickel, could phone and say, meet me at the airport, we have to go to this place and we have work to do. So you're literally living out of a bag. I missed so many milestones with my daughter. My husband's incredible. He was like a single dad during that time, but I was exhausted. Like I would leave Monday at 6 in the morning and I'd come back on a red eye Friday night. So just in time to take my daughter to her tap dancing lessons or ballet or, whatever it was, swimming is what I would do. But you miss so much during the week. So, they have this perspective, oh, you can have it all, which is true to a certain point, but you have to decide what's important and where you're going to make sacrifices. So to have that role, I had to have an extremely supportive partner, husband, and he was amazing, still is. And so the point there was I was just getting really burnt out, to the point where you're missing first days of school, you're missing the first concert with your daughter, you're missing a lot of stuff. And it started to really get to me the older that she got. And plus, the environment, being one of the only women in a department, the only female executive, was stressful unto itself.
hmm,
Highly competitive, highly toxic, in no way, excuse me, collaborative, where people would work together. And so I went in with certain principles and wouldn't cross the line. And one of the reasons for leaving was because I guess it was so many years as an analyst, I wasn't willing to mislead shareholders or the company by changing numbers to create a better picture. I refused to do that. So someone changed my numbers and I
Wow.
went into an executive meeting and I said, those aren't my numbers and I've got proof. I can go get my computer and show you 50 different iterations of that, but I don't agree with this initiative. It's not going to make any money and those aren't my numbers.
Hmm.
And I was told, well, the train's already left the station. And I said, I'm not going to be part of this because also in my undergrad, I'd taken a lot of accounting courses and your reputation is everything. You cross that line, you never go back. So I chose to leave. And at that point, I never really left the university. I was always going to conferences there. And C Squared MIT was a research division that was at the Rotman School initially. And they were looking for someone to liaison between the private sector and the university to model data to become more predictive. And this was before AI.
Hmm.
That was extremely interesting to me. So that's what I went to do. And that was in 1994, 95 period. I might be off a couple months. So I went there and never looked back because it's like you have to in any career stay aligned with who you are. And I
Yeah.
have a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong. I won't mislead. I won't set people up. I won't misrepresent. I won't make numbers look better than they are just for the sake of a career. It's not worth it. And on top of that, missing so many milestones with my daughter.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of all of those things with that support. So going to the university was a much better option. So I worked there, worked with Loblaws, Canadian Tire. Many of the companies that I worked with in the private label realm was same companies that sponsored it. Was IBM, Canadian Tire, Loblaws. I think there was a few others, and they all gave money to do this kind of research. It was great, pre-AI, pre-machine
Yeah.
learning, and all those other things. So I worked there for almost 3 years, but they were funded by the provincial government. And when governments change, the funding was lost.
Okay.
So, and while I was there, had my son. And that's, I know it's a long way to get there, but that's where I started teaching at the University of Toronto. My son was 2 weeks old, and Andy Mitchell at the time was the head of the department. And he said, the marketing faculty is not able to teach. Here's the textbook. The class is in 2 days. That's how I started
Wow.
teaching. And I thought,
That's
and he goes, you're a VP
yeah.
of marketing. How difficult can it be? That's where I started. So you got to be careful what you wish for, because I said one day I'm going to go back and do this.
Yeah.
And then it fell on my lap. So the very first class, I brought the stroller or the pram into the class, and my son was sleeping because I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah.
Thankfully, he's a good sleeper. He slept through the whole 2 hours. Kids thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
And then never looked back. So I've been literally teaching at the University of Toronto since 1996 because of that one incident. And
Wow.
then I started teaching marketing and then started teaching market research, case study courses. Last semester was insane. I had 6 courses plus my consulting practice. So it was nuts. But I'm
Yeah.
very proud of it because for almost every year that I've taught there, I've won awards for outstanding teaching because it's the practical application of what students are learning. So one of the challenges that I face is that I put tremendous pressure on myself to stay current, always getting more certificates, whether it's Six Sigma, activity-based costing, whether it's, the master's with a focus on AI and marketing during the pandemic, always learning something new, certifications and accounting, understanding digital marketing, digital media. I have a responsibility when you're teaching is to prepare students for the world that they're going to graduate into and not the world I left behind. So
Mhm.
it's probably easier for me than some faculty to talk about launching new products or issues with leadership in business or how do you work with a sales team, because I've got tremendous success, but I've got a lot of failure for products I've launched too.
Yeah.
And then, there's a lot of learning from that as well. So it's a combination of taking the quantum of your experience and saying, how can I help my students not do what I did, but do better than what I did?
Yes.
Like I remember the first day on a job in marketing and I had to write a marketing plan and I had zero clue on how to do that, which is why initially when I started teaching marketing, there was no final. The final was you have to write a marketing plan.
Yeah.
So that's what's different. So I think you were in consumer behavior. You were my
Yes, I
consumer.
was.
Did you take market research with me?
I was going to, but the class filled up really fast. I'm taking it next year, but
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not teaching it next year.
oh, dang
So
it.
I know, like when I taught market research, because I was teaching all three sections, there's no final. It was a group assignment to do a research project. So you actually had to, students learned how to design a survey, field a survey, tabulate the results, present it, and then I brought my friends in from the private sector to actually watch the presentations from major research houses, CPG companies, consulting firms to do it because that's what you're going to have to do when you graduate. So
Yeah.
because I was teaching all three sections, well, what happened was we had two full classes of 55, and then we had 55 people on the wait list. So I told the university just add another class.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as long as there's chairs in the classroom, I'm good. I go by
Yeah.
that. So we had 150, but at the university, it's you were part-time instructor. Actually, July 1st, I do have some good news. I've got I've got the status of assistant professor right now, so full-time, part-time professor. So it's great for me and my career to be able to do that. But last semester, I taught six classes for the first time. Like all the classes I taught, consumer behavior, sales management, strategic marketing communications, I'd never taught them before. So I
Oh,
literally had
wow.
six classes I'd never taught before in my life. So it was a tremendous amount of work just to be on top of it. So this is what you experienced in class. This is the
Hmm.
first time I taught consumer behavior. Now I've
Wow.
got a lot of
That's,
experience in it, but first time I've actually taught it.
yeah. Yeah. Definitely
So,
difference. Yeah. Teaching something versus doing it yourself. That's that's something like I've always enjoyed teaching. In my I had a part-time job just teaching piano as
oh,
I taught
nice.
to kids with a wide age range. The youngest kid I had was 4 and the oldest was 13. So it was a huge range. And there's that thing of that not all great players are great coaches. And you know,
That's
uh
true.
yeah, it's very chill. Like even especially in any field, I would assume, especially in your field, that there's a lot of people who are great at their job, but when they have to teach somebody who is brand new, it's usually like, oh, just do it. Why can't you do it properly? And it's a whole other skill. Like my mom's been a teacher for a long time as well. She taught kindergarten, so it's there's many other factors there as well. And yeah, I think it's very interesting. When I look at your career and just I guess the life that you've allowed us to see is I see the reason why you succeed in so many different things is because one, I think is you're not afraid to fail, which is
No.
something that, too many people are afraid of, right? Like when I started this podcast, I wanted to start this for maybe 6 or 7 months before it. And then it took the first year being, emotionally draining because it's online and I'm at home and I finished high school online. It was just a whole mess in terms
Oh
of like,
yeah, for
right.
sure.
And I had to when I had those very literally maybe I can count on my hand the amount of interactions I've had with people online that like progress further than just a group project. Those I felt like people needed some form of this and it's almost I forget the word, but it makes me feel good to have these kind of conversations with people. And I was just like, you know what, just start it. I don't really care about who it reaches. And, if one person listens to it, that's all that matters, right? And, now we're on episode, this would be 29. And
Wow.
it's been a year and a half. I used to be very consistent. Like I used to post every week, but then my scheduling kind of was messed up. I couldn't the hardest thing is getting guests on time, and everyone is so busy with their own stuff.
Mhm.
So I've tried to change it back to every 2 weeks. And I've had to take a break during exam periods. But the thing is, it's just not stopping, I think, because I remember you mentioned in class that you were a martial artist. You did Taekwondo back in the day, right?
I did Taekwondo. It was the best thing you can do for fitness, and it also helps you deal with stress.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
I started it ironically after leaving COT in that VP role and just to decompress. And, I really liked it until I started to really wreck my knees and then had to stop.
Yeah.
But as a self, defense mechanism and for cardio health and for discipline, it's actually really good. But also, I think everybody should have some kind of training in
Yes.
self-defense in the world that we live in. And it goes back to, like, I think I told you in class, I was born in West Africa. I
Hmm.
was born in Lagos, Nigeria. My father's East Indian, my mother's Scandinavian. And when I was born, Nigeria was okay, but it became very unstable after independence. So we left Africa because my father was poisoned and almost killed. So
Wow.
I've actually lived in mansions and I've lived in hostels. Like I've been homeless too at times in my life when my parents lost everything. So what that teaches you is resilience. So I know what it's
Hmm.
like to have cooks and nannies and, people to help in the house and have tennis courts in the backyard. I know that life in Nigeria, but I also know the life in the homeless shelter on Dundas Street West
Yeah.
when we came to Canada. I've seen both of those worlds. So I think it makes me extremely understanding of everybody in that sense
Hmm.
that, my area of research too was emotive mapping. So I look out at my students and I can tell by their faces if they're frustrated, angry, or confused or something else. And I know, most students are either visual learners or auditory learners. So you notice in the class, when I see you're not understanding, I'll interject a group work or how about this or figure this out. So
Hmm.
teaching you something and then go use it. Now I'm going to teach you something else, now go use it. Then I'm going to teach you something else and then go use it. But it's like when you have that experience, I notice a lot of what's going on in the classroom because, my father went from being a senior person in British Railways to having to work as a janitor in northern Quebec. And that took an emotional toll. My
Yeah.
father, because, I have a responsibility to be honest with people and say, you may see this professor there that does so well, but there's a life behind it. So you're probably very familiar that in Indian culture, mental health is not a thing. The
Doesn't
services
exist
in
really.
India for mental health, that's not an issue. So when you have a father that's East Indian that suffers from extreme depression and suicidal tendencies, there's no one in Indian culture that understands that or even thinks it's a thing. It's like, get over it,
Yeah.
things like that. That was my childhood. I had a suicidal manic depression father through most of my childhood because my father in his 50s walked away from what he spent a life building
Yeah.
to becoming a janitor after being an engineer in northern
That's
Quebec.
crazy.
It is crazy, but it makes you really understand the world from different dimensions, right? So, but I never saw the life as what I was going to become. It's
Mm.
like I want to do this, I want to be successful, I always want to be able to get for my kids what I need. So I never let any situation define me. So in terms of success, you really have to, how you focus on high value goals. So if
Mm.
your goal is to get an A in a class and it's very high value to you, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
But if you say you're going to get an A, but it's not a priority, you won't. You see what I mean? So for
Yeah.
me, it was always what's next. It was always the glass is half full. So it's really interesting to me when people think you've lived that entitled life. It's not the case. I left home. I was barely 17. I was in
Yeah.
second year university because I skipped so many grades.
Yeah.
I
That's
worked from
crazy.
5 in the morning until noon making pastries.
Yeah.
Went to school, UTM in Mississauga, noon till about 6. Went home and did my homework. Got up at 4 in the morning and went back to work. I did that for 3 years because I
That's
was
crazy.
supporting myself. So I understand that. So when kids say, I'm overwhelmed because I have all the stuff. I get it because I lived that life, growing up because I'm one of six. And my father was in and out of institutions because of his depression. And you were pretty much on your own.
Yeah.
So when you leave home at 16 and a half because you want to stay in university, um, you have a different perspective of life as others. But I always saw more about what was ahead of me instead of what was behind me.
Yeah.
So I think for me in a class, I noticed more about students than maybe other faculty would because it wasn't a privileged life at all. So you
Hmm.
tend to notice when something is wrong with a student or what's going on. And I've dealt with students with extreme situations. And, you brought up during the pandemic, I taught my students online how to make homemade hot chocolate the Scandinavian way. We had
Yeah.
drop-in sessions on Saturdays, like how you melt real chocolate and make homemade hot chocolate. I had a student in Myanmar that was on the Zoom call, and you could hear the gunshots in the background. So we
Yeah.
shifted her class to Saturday because the military shut down the power.
Yeah.
And what was shocking is over 50% of my students showed up for Saturday at 10 in the morning. 50%.
Hmm.
And I said, "Why are you guys here?" And it was during the pandemic. There's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
at the Rotman School, we created a database that my TA helped me do this. And sorry, my allergies are really bad.
Yeah.
We created a database so students could go for social distance walks. And that's what they did because, there were some students that haven't left the dorm room for 3 months.
Hmm.
I mean, during the pandemic, I dealt with one student called me at 10 o'clock at night, and everyone in her family was in emergency with the Delta variant, and her
Wow.
father almost died. So you're the professor, but you're the only one to talk to. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like you had to take a step back and said, like, okay, who do I have to be to survive this? And
Yeah.
students like passport expired, someone passed away in another country, they can't get home. It was something that no one had ever expected, but it's just, what do you have to do? There's nothing else that's more important than this right now.
Yeah.
And I think that was maybe a challenge with some of the faculty. But getting back to how can you do this? I think as much as all of those things in life, there's some things that you think, well, I wish I could not experience that, but I don't feel that way because I think every experience that I've had made you who you are today. You take away one of those things and you're something different. If I hadn't gone through that, I don't think I would notice what I notice now because it would never have been part of your world.
Yeah.
So I think that's a difference. And during the pandemic, I think it really, my grandmother used to say the Scandinavian one, the Viking one would say, you find out how strong people are like tea bags. You find out how strong they are when you throw them in hot water. And the
That's a good one.
pandemic was proof of that, because I realized during the pandemic, I could be the only one the students could call. They can't call
Yeah.
home. There's nowhere else to go. What does that student do? Now, and to this day, it was such an honor. The student in question, her father almost passed away from COVID. He was intubated for a long period of time. I had the privilege of meeting him after the pandemic. So I
Wow.
would give her all these Viking tea recipes for the immune system, and she literally would make a thermos and take it down to Mount Sinai for her dad. It was the only connection
That's
he
so
had to
nice.
the outside world. So it's kind of like in life, yes, you're a teacher, but what is your role in life? You
Yes.
know, can you take all the experience that you've had and make the world a better place? So I think the relationship that I have with my students is different, but it's unique. And I think because I'm a parent,
Yes.
because I'm one of six kids, I understand it. Because of my life and having to support myself, it's kind of like so many students just, or people that you meet think, oh, you're very lucky, to have all those things, but they really have no idea
Yeah.
who you really are.
Yeah. That's one thing I don't know, maybe not, I wouldn't say struggled with, but I've thought about. is as I grow older, right? As I went from teen to whatever young adult, whatever it is right now. Um, like it's I hear all these stories about because when I was a kid, I was very lucky to be sheltered from the craziness of family. Um, you know, in some ways I was like, man, I was kind of too sheltered by my parents, but now I think I've matured enough to realize that it's good that I learned certain things after, I turned
Mhm.
18 about my dad's side of the family, my mom's side of the stuff they went through when they first came here, like especially through the 80s was just really rough. And it's like as somebody I'm glad to have grown up with, you know, there's I don't know, it's just this dichotomy I have like in my head is there's one thing that a difficult early life gives you so many things to help you survive and deal with hardship. But when that generally when those people grow older, they want their children not to experience that. But in some ways they're missing out on some other things that they may have experienced by going through those tough times. And as somebody who is the on the opposite side, where I was lucky, my parents lived a rough life, and they somehow made it out uh in comparison to maybe other people in our family who didn't, right? um and I'm almost like I don't know if I could be on that level. And what I've been trying to do is just replicate that sort of hardship, but in a more healthy way, right? Instead of financial, going through financial hardship and all these things that are, real issues that can affect you for the rest of your life, your well-being, pushing myself hard in training is one, right? Like I've been a martial artist since I was 11 years old.
Mhm.
And it's always been an uphill battle as a smaller person, just in general. I always weighed less. I started training with the adults at 14. These are men, like I'm sparring with grown men. And it was such a mental battle, but I think that, oh, and physical as well. But it taught me so much that you can still push through things despite your, I guess your limitations. And I'm very lucky. I'm so lucky. I have, I have all my senses. I have all my limbs. I don't have to worry about food. There's so many things I'm grateful for, right? But to try and to be able to experience and go push through hard times, you have to put yourself in that scenario. That's what I learned about through martial art. Because if you don't practice your martial art under pressure, the technique, you're not really fully utilized. It's like studying something and never taking a test. It's
Yeah, but you can't memorize all the stances in martial arts and then expect to get into a fight and win. You have to actually
yes,
experience.
yes.
So
Yeah,
I,
it's
I
like yeah. Yeah, it's exactly like how you can it's hard to be taught a topic, especially in like commerce, something commerce related, where it's so much about the real application that hasn't actually experienced that in the real world, right? And I mean, I'm just trying to do a little bit I can to try to experience difficult things that make me uncomfortable, as much as possible in a healthy way. Because instead of fighting in the street, doing stupid stuff like that, which I could have been doing, right? I know so many of my um, people at my school were into that kind of stuff back in
that's
like,
ridiculous.
right. And then it's like, especially as a martial artist, you look at that and you're like, dude, you're stupid. It's like, I do this for bettering myself, but I'm not trying to, I'm not training to hurt. I'm training to defend myself. But yeah.
But that's the thing. When we lived in India and in Africa, my father had two wallets. He had one wallet that he kept hidden, and he had another one that was in his back pocket that was visible.
Yeah.
So if he was going to get robbed, he would always throw the wallet in the opposite direction of where he'd be running. And it would
Yeah.
have like maybe
Yeah.
the equivalent of $20 in, but no ID.
Mhm.
So the robber would feel that they won, but he would win more
Exactly.
because it was like, like in martial arts, it's like not to engage in a fight, but you've got one chance for one movement or one kick or one punch to get away. It's not to
Yes.
engage in fighting. So my daughter studied it too. My son studied, boxing. My husband's a kickboxer, but it's
Mhm.
all about, like, most people who excel in martial arts don't ever fight.
Exactly.
And, it's
It's so
good to know,
ironic from the outside, but
so
when
it's
you're a
good.
martial artist, it's so different.
Exactly. I don't ever want to get into a fight. I just like to know that I can. And it was really good for fitness. But getting back to your point, you don't have to get sick to feel empathy for someone who's sick. You don't
Hmm.
have to be poor to help someone who's poor. And
Yeah.
so it's different to have empathy and to make a difference in life versus actually having to experience it. So I think it's dangerous to think you have to go through that. I don't want anyone of my students or my family to go through what I went through at a homeless shelter where I would skip a meal because my little brother was hungry. It's a great way to lose weight. I looked at it, okay, I'm starting high school. I'm going to be in fighting condition
Oh my
because,
goodness.
like, it's how you position things in your mind, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you take away any of those experiences, as difficult as they were, that you change. And so I guess the most profound thing for me is when I was born in Africa, the doctor told my father I'd never be able to walk because my ankles were going the wrong way. Now he's an engineer. And the
Hmm.
doctor said to him, well, we don't have anything we can fix her legs with. So my father said, well, which way do her legs have to go? What do I have to build? So he created these leg braces that locked into the edge of the crib. And for years had steel leg braces up my legs, locked in what looked like army boots.
Yeah.
But he made my legs go the right way. I think he should have patented it. Think what he could have done for the world.
Yeah.
But he always said to me, well, your life would have been different if I was a doctor. I said, yeah, I wouldn't be able to walk. But because
Yeah.
you're an
Yeah.
engineer, you think differently than a doctor would, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like you can take your life, you should never go back and try to change anything because any change is going to make you someone else.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of my success in teaching is a function of, careers where some things were terrible. I don't know if I told students that I had a situation where it was toxic. There people would just be out to undercut everything you did until one day I
Yeah.
said, like, this is not what I want as a career. And I just walked away. And that's when I left the private sector and went into C Squared MIT and then had the opportunity to teach and then started my own consulting practice, mentoring companies with marketing strategies and things like that quite successfully. So I always do that in addition to teaching. But what led me to that was the quantum of experience. You take away one of those things and you're a very different person.
Yeah.
So I notice like people that are homeless. As a young child, my mother used to taught me how to knit. We'd knit mittens and blankets and scarves for homeless people. And over the holidays,
Hmm.
we'd go downtown. And I think that changes you and how you see the world.
Yes.
Like I have been with colleagues that are quite well off that look at a homeless person and say, oh, that's blocking my view. They shouldn't be there. And I see a homeless person and think, when was the last time they had something to eat?
Yeah.
Do I have anything in the car that you can give them? That's a function of your life. Would I have that
Yeah.
perspective if I had a different life? Probably not.
Yeah. I
So,
think
but
that's very interesting because there's a saying that money doesn't buy class, right? And I think that's very true. As somebody, as you said, you experienced the highest of the highs, the lowest of the lows. But I don't think, or that your character was almost positively affected because you've
mhm.
dealt with so much, such a diversity of experience that you're able to empathize with people, and that you learned or you were taught that it doesn't matter what position you are people, right?
But it's
And
also ethnicity because I do have siblings that struggled with ethnicity because, my mother's Scandinavian, my father's a dark East, very, very dark East Indian. And, in the sense that when I came to Canada, there was a lot of racism. You go to Northern
yeah,
Quebec and you're East Indian, you were the only
yeah,
family
yeah,
that's East Indian. But in the winter with an ice storm, you're the only family whose father built a generator and has electricity. So that was one way to make friends in
Yeah.
northern Quebec. So you go through that. So I had, when people saw me, they thought, oh, you're Spanish or Italian, until they
Yeah.
see your father, your parents. And, it's crazy, but all of those things are who you are. You can't hide from any aspect of that because it's part of your DNA. So I think
Yeah.
one of the things that it teaches you, and then you're born in Africa, which is a whole other dimension. Like, in
Yeah.
terms of how you see the world is probably very
Real
different
different.
if you were just East Indian or just Scandinavian, or if you weren't born in Africa. It's a different perspective, because in northern Quebec, all of my friends were East Indian, Chinese, and African. Like, a
Hmm.
lot of the kids that were Caucasian, when they knew who your parents were, they weren't allowed to play with you and stuff like that too. So even in Africa, because your father's East Indian, you're non-white. So you can't go to the British hospitals for the best care. You go to
Yeah.
these other hospitals. And that's in my lifetime. So you can't imagine what it's like for other segments of society that have always been marginalized. So
Yeah.
it's totally, totally different. I mean, I was in San Francisco when I worked with COT, and it was not San Francisco, it was Oakland. And I was lining up at a Marriott, and there was a lady that was in front of me who was older and African American, and the person behind the counter waved at me and said, "You're next." And I said, "No, no, this woman in front of me is next." And they said, "Don't worry about her." And I said, "I do worry about her, and she's ahead of me in the line. So go to the
Yeah.
line." And so there was a lot of homeless people outside the hotel, because that was the time when the government cut off any illegal immigrants from any type of social assistance. And many people would be outside on the sidewalk of the hotel. So I would order, in the US, when you order a medium pizza, it's like an extra large in Canada. I'm allergic to
Yeah. Yeah.
milk, but I would order milk, and I would have maybe one slice, take the rest of it outside to the family. And to the point, the guy who was running security, or at the door, he said, "You don't have to do that." And I said, "Well, if not me, then who?" "Yes, I do have to do this." And there
Hmm.
was families out there with babies. And I'm like,
Yeah. It's like, how
how
can
can
you
you
not feel
just, how
anything?
can you walk by and go to church on Sunday and walk by? Like, I always questioned, I got in so much trouble because I was still raised Catholic. My father was a Goan Indian.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, there's a lot of people that come to church to worship a homeless person. How many did they walk past on the way to this church? And my father's
Yeah.
like, "You shouldn't ask those questions." No, no, I have these questions. I always had questions like that.
Yeah.
So I was perpetually in trouble. But it's just, I think your life makes you see the world differently. But I think it also makes you more aware of the world and
Hmm.
different things. You don't have any blind sides to reality in terms of what that is. So, coming back to it, it's, there's a lot of my siblings that, like, they wish their life wasn't like that. It was more like an Achilles heel, and I would have done all these things. But you know what? I put myself through university. I ended up having very successful kids and a
Yeah.
successful marriage, because that's what I chose. So the question is, what do you choose? And then it comes back to what I mentioned earlier. You tend to accomplish goals that have a very high value to you.
Yeah.
And in East Indian culture, grades are everything. Like, if you
Yeah.
don't get
Yeah.
100%, then there's always some cousin in some remote part that got
Oh, did you
102%
know?
in the
It's
bonus.
like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah.
I
And
know I don't.
yeah, because the education is a ticket out of poverty in Indian culture.
Yeah.
It's a status symbol. Professors are held in high esteem in Indian culture. It's not like other parts of the world. That was a big part too of who I was raised.
Yeah.
You couldn't tell my father, well, so and so across the street only got a B. Well, that he didn't care. Like, this is
Oh my
just,
God. Yeah. I've heard those words
so
many
yeah.
times.
So the sad part for me is, before my father was poisoned and he started to have these issues, many mental health issues, he was a very different person. So my younger siblings never got to know who he was before he was sick,
Hmm.
because two of my siblings were born in Quebec and they have no recollection of who he was before. He was a marathon runner, competed at elite levels,
Yeah.
was the head of the department, was a very, very different person. I think it's sad that some siblings have no idea of that. or
Yeah.
remember it.
Gives you different perspective on your own parent. You don't experience such a great shift um, in who they are as a person. And unfortunately, I get it must have affected the way they viewed their father,
Oh,
and in
definitely.
comparison to how you had viewed him. You saw the before and after.
Well, yeah, it was added complexity because he was over 20 years older than my mother too.
Hmm.
So,
Oh,
he
yeah.
passed away when he was 90 and he lived independently, until that time because my parents, the marriage just was not working. It was culture, it was age, it was many, many things.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that many of my siblings looked at that life as something that held them back. And I always looked at every experience that either propels you forward because you always have a choice as to how you're going to react to everything. It's your choice. So
Yeah.
it's not what happens to you, it's how you choose to react to it. And I think that that's one of the things that students or the younger generation, I think you grow a lot from failing. Like you just can't be defined by a number or a grade.
Yeah.
And, most successful people on the planet were good B students. They weren't A's,
Hmm.
definitely not A's, because, anyone can get an A in the absence of nothing else to do. But if you have to
Yeah.
work and support yourself, then it's just a matter of discipline if you don't have anything else. And all you
Yeah.
have to do is study, but you still get a lot of students in that position that are still overwhelmed because they don't know how to manage stress or their time. Like it's
Yeah.
tragic. And I see that a lot to the point where I've actually sat one-on-one with students and say, here's how you put together a schedule to make sure you get these things done, because many students will leave it to the last weekend and then realize I can't get everything done in this weekend, but they chose to put themselves in that situation.
Yeah. It's a bad cycle that a lot of people, I mean, even myself have been in. I think everyone's experienced that to some level. Um, but yeah, like I think there's the perspective on that of just like really dealing with stressful times and stressful things that are happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think one way to deal with it is just viewing it as like, at least for me, it's when it's something that doesn't really affect my well-being. Like for example, I used to attach so much value to my schooling. Like I used to be, man, if I would see a grade that's lower than whatever a 90, and I'd be like, oh man. And if I get a 90, it's not like I'm happy. It's like, okay, I'm not sad. You know what I mean? And there's a certain point like in my life that I changed. It was in 11th grade and I had something happen that was um kind of, well, in the moment I wasn't scared, but after looking in retrospect, it was like, wow, pretty scary for my parents, right? There's something happening, their child. And I I I realized that, it's life is too short to dwell on, these little things like who cares about a 2% difference in a mark, right? Like it's not the end of the world. Who cares? Like you can spend a little bit more time on this. You can have fun sometimes, right? You can. It's not all about schooling. Life is not all about this, right? And then after that point, I really started to focus on other aspects of my life that I felt I was neglecting. And like now, if I didn't honestly, if I didn't have that happen to me, I probably wouldn't have started this podcast. I wouldn't have done a lot of things. I used to be very shy, very so shy as a kid. Like it was just I couldn't even order at restaurants up until maybe 12 or 13. And my parents are like forcing me, of course, because that's just how they are. And it wasn't really until that point where I was like, why does it matter? Like, who cares about this opinion? They don't care. I'm not that important, right? Like that they care so much about how I said this sentence and I sound nervous when I say this. There's so many little things I used to care about that don't really matter. It's about the relationships you have with people, like experience of life, rather than these little things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And, you know, I guess to your point of it's not something that sets you back. It's something that pushes you forward. That's definitely something I looked at in this with the glass half full perspective, right? Because looking back on it, it was something that could have like we didn't know what the result was going to be, right? Like it could have been something really serious. It just we thankfully just turned out to be okay.
That's
And
good.
right, and I was like, for me, it was such a weird moment because when I tell people the story, like I have a large scar. I had a surgery, right? I have a huge scar right
Mhm.
here, probably about that big. And whenever people see it, I tell them the story about why I have it. And there's a point when we were waiting for a diagnosis, like in the waiting room, and it was like we were waiting 20, 30 minutes. And it was like I went through all stages of life sitting there. At first I was playing games with my phone. I didn't really care. And I could tell my parents were so stressed out, like any parent would be, right? And then I sat there, my phone died. And I sat there, closed my eyes, and I just thought about, I literally reflected on my life as a 16-year-old. I was like, what's happened? And by the end of that period, I was like, if this is the end, I'm okay. Like that's it. I was so at peace. It was like it's so weird to think about that. And when other
Mhm.
people talk about those experiences, right? Um, and then we went to the room, and then the doctor said, "Don't worry about it. Whatever. We just have to operate on this area, and it's gonna be fine, right?" And then my parents, of course, huge sigh of relief. But
Right.
in that moment, I didn't feel scared. Like it was all over. I just felt lucky. I was like, you know what? Like, because I'm walking by, I was at Mount Sinai. I carry my patient card all the time, um,
Mhm.
because it's just a reminder of, I walk by the chemotherapy area. It's like these are children who are dealing with so much, and it's like I was just so lucky that it wasn't anything more serious, right? And it's like, man, these kids wish they could do something else other than sit here and go through this treatment and hopefully they survive, right? They don't know. There's so
Right.
much uncertainty. And then from that point, I was like, you know what? Just if you want to do something, just do it, right? Like I used to over research everything, go too in depth, and then just not do it because it was just uh decision fatigue, right? Just choice overload, if to use a consumer behavior term. But
Yeah.
it was yeah, that was something that really changed, and I try to use that to, I guess, push me forward now. But
I think that's really important. And even other things too, like, you can get books or you can, donate games to Sick Kids Hospital or Mount
yeah.
Sinai and make a difference or drop off something. I think all those things in life make a difference because one of the things you learn is that it's not what you say or you did in life that people remember, it's how you made them feel.
Hmm.
So, and I think I knew my grandmother for not very long because she passed away when I was in university, actually. And she used to say, don't rent space in your brain if they didn't pay for it. And
Yeah.
what people think about you is none of your business. What do you think? What do you think about you?
Yeah.
Because so many people, because of societal pressure, you allow yourself to be defined by other people's thoughts. And I think social media has made it worse because it's unrealistic filters and expectations
Yeah.
and you see things and it's not the way people are, and people are looking outside of themselves for validation and acceptance. And I don't know if it was your class, but I said to the students, if I called you and I said, you don't know me, but I don't like your shoes, how would you
Hmm.
feel? And they said, well, we don't care. We don't know you. And I said, well,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but on social media, if someone doesn't know you, that they'll never meet you and they're never going to be a part of your life and they don't like something about you, why do you care? And the difference is other people see that the person that you'll never meet or know are going to share that with other people that you'll never meet or know, but that
Hmm.
bothers you.
Yeah.
But they're not significant in your life. So why? I think what social media does is it forces society to get validation and reinforcement for things outside of themselves and not inside themselves. Like, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I stand for, and an inability to have that be enough because outside of yourself, there's never going to be enough. There's always going to be someone with more money or a bigger house or more cars or
Yeah.
whatever. And what are you going to use, or more likes or more followers or whatever? How much is enough? Like, what is it that you validate from inside yourself? Like, how many lives did you change? Like, I like to take a step back from the semester and thinking, did my students have a positive experience? Is it going to increase their career opportunities? Is it going to teach them how to be leaders in their own realm? Is it going to give them more confidence? Are they going to be able to, deal with stress better? Not what did you get?
Yeah.
Whether it's a 72 or does it really matter? When you get that job and you're successful, does anyone go back and say, hey, you know what, Sujin, you only got a 72 in this class. I think we
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
reconsider your role. That never happens in the real world. This whole definition by a number, whether it's likes or a grade or whatever, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
The only number that I think you should be worried about is if you're incarcerated and that's your inmate number. Other than that, all the other numbers don't matter.
Yeah.
So unless it appears on a jail cell or on your shirt, it's a number, you know?
Mhm.
So, and I think that that's what social media does. And I think that's what society does in general, is it makes you look for confidence and validation and goals outside of yourself. So it's like when you think of any goal you accomplished, it probably had it was a high value goal.
Yeah.
So if studies are not a high value goal, you won't be successful at it because there's other things that are more important.
Mhm.
Martial arts, if it's not, like, what are your goals? So I think that, like, a lot of the things I think at the university level or in teaching, I think a lot should be done in teaching students more about time management and self-esteem and confidence, in addition to just the pressure of the grade. Because I had a
Yeah.
situation at one of the companies I worked with, and they had a multitude of lawyers on staff because
Mhm.
they were such a litigious company. It was ridiculous. And they were just annoying. And I remember, I'm not a lawyer. I never want to be a lawyer. And that's
Yeah.
just my preference. And I remember someone said to me, well, but I would read legal briefs just to be on the same level, just because I know it annoyed them in meetings on the leadership team.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would do that. This was very young in my career. So I would actually research. It was before the internet, and read the legal brief, and I'd be able to go toe to toe on what the issues were. And I remember one of the senior people in the company was also a lawyer, and he was on the executive team. He goes, well, I'm a lawyer and that should command respect. And I turned around, and this, I'll never forget, it was in an executive meeting. I was in my 20s. And I said, well, Jack the Ripper was a doctor, and look what it did for him. And that was actually true. And like
Mhm.
the people in the room, just like you could drop a pin, it was silence.
Dead silent. Yeah.
And I said, what you do is not who you are.
Mhm.
So, and there's many people that have amazing credentials that were assassins, or,
Yeah. Yeah.
caused wars or did, like, so what? And so many people, and that's the thing, that's looking outside of yourself for a title or for these accolades. And you're not really investigating it deeper to say, like, who am I really?
Mhm.
Like, what have I done to make the world a better place? And so I think that's maybe the reason why I'm quite successful at the university and getting a lot of awards, was because I genuinely care about the success of the students beyond the grade.
Yeah.
And I've dealt with students that have been in rehab. In your class, 2 students were in rehab the whole semester, couldn't be in a
Wow.
group, and did the projects themselves and still ended up with a good B. So that's what the role of a teacher is.
Yeah.
How can you be successful in life beyond this grade? How do you make concessions? Because with a fourth year student putting themselves through school, just finish, just graduate, then you have a life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the difference, is not just to see the student and the number, but to see beyond that.
Mhm.
And I think that came across in a lot of the classes with consumer behavior. It was
Mhm.
quite interactive, but the students really supported each other.
Yeah.
Like, they never went out and said, oh, well, that's stupid. It was always to pick, you know, take it further from what this student just said. I'd like to add this, but nobody ever said, I won't tolerate
Disagree. I don't like
disrespectfulness.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I won't tolerate that in the classroom. So students, they learned from me, but they learned a lot from each other too. So I'm quite happy with the way this semester went too. I mean, because
Yeah,
we
it was
broke
very enjoyable.
records at the university. The first time VR has been used in the business room. First time get out of the classroom and go look at this. I mean, I'm sure you guys were shocked. It's like, no, go to a Circle K, figure it out.
Yeah.
But you think how your mind was expanded by
Yeah.
things you never considered before on consumer behavior by being in that environment.
Mhm.
I had a few gamers though in the VR simulation that were trying to stick potato chips in the ceiling and jump on them to see if they'd explode. That was hilarious.
Yeah, yeah, that was I would probably if I was doing the VR headset I probably would have done something like that too. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it was something different, but it's something you can talk about in an interview that's going to get you a job.
Yeah. It's
Because how do
all
people,
applies, right?
sorry?
Every experience that you have and it all can be used to apply in your whatever interview or job or it's just how you view it, I guess, right?
There's over 25 students that I know of that leverage something they learned in class, whether it was sales management or consumer behavior or category management, that got paid internships.
Hmm.
Because it was also the first time category management was taught in a class at the Rotman School.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
It's
remember I'm thinking, I have to do this. And I was like, oh crap, I need to write a whole student guide because they're not going to be able to do it. So, like, I literally dropped off the face of the earth for the weekend and actually wrote that guide from scratch, thinking
oh
they
man.
can't do this unless I write a guide. So then it's like, okay, you have to take a crash course in this. And I'm hopeful that it helped you when you read through the guide and what is category management and the 4Ps from
It
different
really did,
perspectives,
yeah. It did.
not realizing when I assigned it that I'd have to do that. And it's like back in February, it's like, oh yeah, all right, I see the void now. I'm getting a lot of questions. I better just sit down and write a guide.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it really
20
did help
pages,
though. Yeah.
just the
Especially
different
within category.
perspectives. Sorry?
Yeah, just especially with that sort of area, right? We're not as familiar. A lot of us aren't as familiar with that. It's funny because when because I learned about a marketing plan in high school. I took a lot of business courses in high school, and my teacher, Mr. Vella, he was director of marketing for Nortel for the South
Okay,
America and Caribbean division, and he was with them for I don't even know 20 years maybe.
right.
Um, and every class that I took from grade 10 till 12, it was like case based, marketing based, and the tests were like, I know you have to do some sort of memorization, like here are the notes, this is what you have to memorize. The most important thing are the cases and what we're doing. Like we did a marketing plan probably every other project for 2 years. That's why like the 4 P's, 2 C's, like I'll never forget. He's like, if you remember anything from these classes, remember those things. And it's funny, I didn't see it again until I took your course. I was like, wow, finally, some stuff I learned in high school is like coming back. And it's like, okay, this kind of almost legitimized it again that another person with experience is like, okay, this is a legit process. Um,
I was really impressed by, the level, of, I guess, focus and the commitment to it. Like a lot of students just went, like, you're really going to tell us to leave the classroom and just go to a store. It's like, yeah, that's how you're going to understand consumer behavior. But
yeah.
it gave a different perspective when you saw students in the classroom. Like, it was a lot of hurdles to get that VR set. I had to buy that personally myself because there was no
Oh, wow.
budget. But it's like, no, I'm not failing. I don't care. I'll go to Best Buy. I'll get it myself. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And
Couldn't
it
agree.
ended up working. And I remember Amir, who helped me in class. It's like, any gamers here want to help me figure this out? And Amir stepped forward, and it was great. And he came to all my other classes. I said, whatever it takes, I'll give you extra
Yeah.
participation grades.
Yeah.
I need your help. And he was just really, really helpful. And there was quite a few students that talked about the VR experience and got paid internships because no other university had exposed students to that. And that is the future of learning and work.
Yeah.
Like, just imagine what you could teach about diversity if all of a sudden you take on the persona of a minority and you see how that person is treated. That's how diversity
Wow.
training,
That's something
it's
to learn.
being used in treating paramedics and firemen too.
Yeah.
And I think it's
That's
it's
crazy.
not going to go away at all. You know,
Yeah, it's even that small snippet, like seeing how virtual reality stuff has progressed, as somebody who has been interested in gaming for since I was a kid, right? It's like it's insane from where it went till like I mentioned in class that our family we did this VR beta testing of this like a full bodysuit game, and you had like a what was it 20 by 20 meter area, so it's huge, and we're all together walking around, and it was amazing how far it's progressed. And this was like maybe 4 years ago, and
Mhm.
seeing where it's progressed now is like, I mean, it's a tool for so many different things. And yeah, it's just it's cool to see where I actually had a few questions. I don't know if you have time for any
Yeah,
more
go ahead.
questions.
I've got a few
Yeah.
more minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I just had since you're always keeping up to date with all these new things going on, I want to ask you a few questions about like current topics in marketing, and specifically with AI. As somebody who has, you went back to school to learn more about it, I wanted to get your perspective on um how these sort of like experiential marketing, like how is it affecting the world of marketing right now? Because I remember you mentioned in class how you'll go up to an ad and it'll change based on the database's impression of who you are, right? And I thought that's just crazy. And
It's it's gonna it's gonna shift from mass marketing to personalized marketing, where you're only gonna see things that are relevant to you. Now that has
mhm,
pros and cons, because let's say right now what's relevant to you is gaming, running shoes, clothes, and something else. But then when does that AI algorithm know when you're ready to be a dad
yeah,
or something like that? So I'll give you an example of the downside of that. I recently went to a funeral for, the father of a very, very close personal friend, and I used Waze to go there. So after the funeral, I'm getting ads to buy coffins and plan my funeral. So like
like
this is like, just because I go to a funeral doesn't mean I want to buy a coffin and plan my own on that day.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
there's other issues where a young man bought an engagement ring at a high-end jewelry store, and social media congratulated him on his engagement, but he hadn't proposed to his girlfriend yet. So I think that
yeah,
it's good that you're only talking to me about things that are relevant. Like if I don't have a dog, I don't want ads for dog food.
yeah,
If I think that's an issue. But I think also when you combine all your information from social media, and right now there's a lot of listening, when you think about Siri or Alexa, that they're always listening to conversations.
hmm,
I'm always shocked when I have a conversation with someone and I don't search it, and all of a sudden ads start popping up
yeah,
regarding that conversation. Or if you ask Siri to stop listening to you, or Alexa, are you recording me? I think it's dangerous, because people have been convicted based on handing over Alexa or Siri files.
yeah. That's crazy. And the
And
police have
then,
direct access to that,
yeah,
right?
so like, don't plan a bank robbery in your living room if you have Alexa, I think is the message,
Yeah, yeah. For any of you
or something
robbers
like
out
that.
there,
But I think it's technology can connect vast amounts of disparate data sets to understand consumers, to detect fraud, and so many other things too. And I think, there are plus sides, but how much is too much? How much information is
yeah,
too much that they're collecting? Because whenever you actually use Waze or Google or any app that's free, you're the product.
yeah,
Even
yeah,
23andMe, the DNA test, right?
yeah.
It
That
goes
was
into a
pretty crazy.
database that's been sold to health insurance companies that could increase your insurance rates because you're predisposed to these kinds of diseases. So
Hmm.
how much is too much? So Google
Yeah.
owns 23andMe, I believe.
Hmm.
So what is the purpose? Like, is it the end of privacy? There's a book called Surveillance Capitalism. So, there's so many of these apps. Look what I'm getting for free. It's shocking what the younger generation will divulge for free,
Yeah,
in terms of your life. And what does that mean down the road? People are losing their jobs because of social media posts,
yeah,
or not getting jobs because of social media posts. So I think personalization and customization are great. Look at Amazon. It looks at your history. it may know that you like red or you like blue and you like these certain things, and it will make recommendations. But all those algorithms assume that past behavior is a projection of future behavior, and it
Yeah.
isn't. So, like, if you weigh 300 pounds and you like Krispy Kreme donuts and you're trying to go on a diet, it doesn't help you to keep getting ads for Krispy Kreme donuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're a smoker or an alcoholic, you don't want to get discounts for cigarettes or alcohol if
Yeah.
you're trying to go in a different direction. So when does the algorithm shift to support your goals versus its goals? So it's that quandary of what is the goal of the algorithm, which is what is the goal of the human, and are
Mhm.
they aligned or are they divergent? And I think that's going to be the problem in the future.
Yeah. Do you think that's where human intelligence can still, there's this whole talk about how technology is replacing people in so many different jobs, right? All these different tech companies are laying off tens of thousands of people. Um, and one thing I think about in marketing is how data is so important. And when I see these kind of the use of AI and how it's not able to predict the change in behavior that is so drastic, right? That is almost the exact opposite for a consumer. Do you think that's where like human intelligence comes in, especially right at this moment? That's why it's so
Well,
important to have both.
you have to break it down as what is AI. There's artificial intelligence means you're getting a machine to behave like a human.
Mm.
Machine learning means you're getting a machine to behave like a programmer. Right now,
Oh,
AI is weak or narrow. AI does not have general intelligence, humans do. That's why a Tesla ran over, smashed into a bus to avoid running over a pylon. So
yeah.
every experience that a human has, consciously or subconsciously, is stored in your brain. So when you're driving a car, you have five senses. Your ears could hear a sound of an 18-wheeler, but visually you can't see it. But
Mhm.
something is telling you something's wrong and to slow down. So technology doesn't have general intelligence. It's like it has to learn by giving it more information. So that's why you call it machine
Yeah.
learning. The machine learns the more data that you give it.
Okay.
But humans have a head start on that because you've got all of the information that's there. So when you look at like disruptions in the supply chain, and algorithms will project the future based on the past, but all of a sudden you have a disruption like
Mhm.
COVID, and then factories close, or the war in the Ukraine or something like that. The past is not going to reflect the future. So I think that AI, the ability with machine learning to connect disparate data sets and say to be more predictive is good, but it's humans working with that technology to make better decisions.
Yeah.
So the technology can detect, can determine and decide, okay, this is what we recommend, possibly choose the right algorithm, possibly not. What are the
Yeah.
biases in the algorithms already? But we're still at the stage where you need human intervention,
Yeah.
because if you look at how AI is being used in giving people relief from being incarcerated or parole,
Mhm.
historically, certain segments of society have a higher probability for repeat offenders. So, what's happened in the US, a Caucasian woman who committed the same crime as someone who was African American, she's got a greater chance of parole, even though she did nothing to improve her life, is granted earlier parole and not having to report, than an African American female who gets a university degree, stays out of trouble,
Yeah.
but her requirements are significantly more harsh than a Caucasian because the database historically said this demographic is going to have the higher success. And it
Mhm.
doesn't look at the individual, it looks at a statistical trend. That is a problem with AI right now.
Yeah.
So, will technology become self aware and have general intelligence? Maybe,
We'll see.
and is AI designed to, most I guess scientists want AI to be smarter than humans,
Mhm.
but how do you get there without general intelligence? You can't. So
Yeah.
like AI right now is very weak and it behaves like a 2-year old. It learns as it grows. The more
Yeah.
information you feed it, but what happens is if you have a change in scenario, an AI algorithm doesn't know how to react, like COVID,
Yeah.
like the pylon, like the Tesla driving upstairs or downstairs, or driving off a cliff, because in its algorithm, it didn't have that there's road construction there, so keep going. A human would look, okay, something's not right here. Maybe we should slow down
Mhm.
because the car doesn't have general intelligence.
Yeah. So it's interesting because it kind of shows you how complex the human mind is, and how little we actually understand of our own mind.
Yeah.
Like the when we try to replicate it in technology, we can see that it's so many things we take for granted as humans. Then we realize when we try to replicate it in technology that it's so difficult to reach this point without, I mean, we reach this through millions of years of evolution and learning
Right.
and change in genetics, and like it's it's interesting how accelerated certain things are nowadays, where
Hmm.
we almost take for granted how long things actually take, right?
Hmm.
Like the acceleration of technology in the last 100 years is like unprecedented in human history. And I think that it kind of shows you, at least to me, it gives me a little bit of hope for just humanity because it shows that we still need these basic kind of human functions, right? That can't be taught yet, um, maybe to technology or input it into an algorithm. Um,
Well, AI doesn't have human empathy, doesn't have
yeah.
compassion, doesn't, you know, artificial intelligence doesn't have emotion. They can mirror an emotional or emotive state robotically with a
Mhm.
human like face, but do they really have empathy? So you're making decisions. It basically AI assumes that every problem can be solved by an algorithm, but we
Mhm.
both know that's not true. Every solution can't be brought down, or every problem can't be solved by an equation,
Mhm. Yeah.
and that's an issue. So just because you see, and I think it's like, I'll give you an example. Like in Canada, there was an issue in Northern Ontario at a grocery store where a 17-year-old mom stole diapers and formula. The manager of the store in Canada didn't call the police, but offered her a job. Said, "You're 17, you're obviously in trouble. How about you
Yeah.
work here?" She's now the manager of that store. That occurred pre-pandemic, and that is actually a true
Mhm.
story. When the same thing happens in the States, you have formula locked up under lock and key.
Yeah.
And right from stealing that, if she had bounced a check for 27 cents, stolen a thing of formula and had a parking ticket, and you live in California, it's 3 strikes. You're going to jail for 5 years, and you're 17 and you're a single mom
Yeah. It's just.
because of the algorithm. Three
Mhm.
strikes. That's it. 5 years. You've destroyed not only her life, but that of her children.
Mhm.
But it's the kind of thing. Incarceration jails in the United States are a business and they're privatized.
Yeah.
Wherever incarceration's been privatized, you have the highest rate of incarceration in the world. It's a business,
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
which is different. So, like, I prefer, like, when I was in Oakland and I was taking food outside, the number one thing they said is, "You must be foreign. You're foreign, ain't you?" And it's like, yeah,
Yeah. You ain't
yeah,
from around here.
I'm I'm foreign, and that's an issue. And it's not to criticize any country. It's just to say, to promote an understanding of what is humanity, and can you mirror that into technology? Not now. It's not to say it won't happen in the future. It's not to say that AI won't have general intelligence and become self-aware.
Mhm.
But right now, I think using AI to help humans do their jobs better is important.
Yeah.
But also to look at, you look at automation and robotics, that's a form of AI, but AI does a task and humans still do jobs. That's the problem. If your job is one task, you're in trouble. If
Yeah.
your job has
Yeah.
complex decision making, then you're not. So you look at supply chains, distribution, picking and packing,
Yeah.
manufacturing of cars. That's a one task thing, a repetitive one task,
Mhm.
and that's a problem. But again, the AI machine, there's been casualties in manufacturing and automotive because the technology doesn't know what to do if a person is standing in the wrong place. It will still
Yeah.
go through and complete that task. So that's the challenge. What the future holds, nobody knows. But I think be careful of how and what you use AI for, and what decisions you're allowing it to make. And is it to the benefit of the algorithm, or is it to the benefit of the recipient of the decision from the algorithm? And I don't think many people are looking at that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something to think about for the future. Yeah, I don't want to keep you for too much longer. I know you have another
That's
commitment
okay. I have
after
time for
this.
one or two more questions, and that's it.
Okay, okay.
This is interesting, actually, Sujin.
Thank you. Thank you. I just like talking to people who know stuff.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yes, very elaborate use of my English vocabulary there. But okay, so the last question was kind of it's pretty general. It's about consumer behavior. Um, and I feel like it's something that a lot of people take for granted.
Hmm.
Uh, maybe just in the in general life, but it's something that I find so interesting. One of the main reasons why I want to go into this, this large field of marketing and why I really like trying to understand the consumer through whatever means, is through my short learning of consumer behavior. And I just wanted to ask you, like, why do you think it's so important, in not just in business, but just in general practice, like in life, like learning about who you're trying to target?
I think it's really important because if you look at what's happening with the layoffs today with Microsoft and Intel and, Deloitte, it really all comes down to consumer behavior. Like Shopify, Amazon, they just assumed that the behaviors during the pandemic would perpetuate post-pandemic. So they
Mhm.
ramped up with all the staff and e-commerce and everything else. And oh, by the way, all of a sudden it's not there. Let's do the layoffs. That's a consumer behavior issue. They're
Yeah,
looking at the projection of profits and managing the stock price, and they're not looking at what's the probability that consumers will continue to do this post pandemic. What is the probability, like with Meta, that people are going to want to stay in a virtual environment when they can go outside and throw a ball? And it's
yeah,
what's really interesting is if you go to retail right now, which I definitely go to stores just to see what's going on and how consumers are behaving. What you're noticing, what's blowing up is frisbees and footsies and outdoor lawn bowling and outdoor
yeah.
darts and everything to get the kids outside that haven't been marketed. The section of games, board games, blowing up again. That's a
Hmm.
consumer behavior where parents are saying, like, wait a second, forget the electronics, get outside, pick up a ball, go swimming, do something. And the same thing with e-commerce. I don't want to be in front of my computer. So it's kind of like consumers value time. Like if there's something I want specifically, I'm going to go on Amazon. I want it tomorrow because it's going to be exactly what I want. And
Yeah.
it's the cost of time, the cost of search and everything else. And there's no buyer's remorse because it's exactly what I want. And I know that. Whereas you look at now, people just want to go out. Like you look at a mall, like at Square One
Yeah.
in Mississauga, I was there yesterday. People just want to go out and look at things, but not many people were carrying bags. So when I'm in a mall, it's like, I'm going to count the 100 people that walk past me in the next 20 minutes, and I'm going to see what percentage are actually carrying a shopping bag. And it
Hmm.
was one or two out of 100.
Wow.
So that kind of is a metric for me that says, I think people are out here just socially to go for a walk or just to get a coffee or have lunch
Yeah.
and to see what's going on, because, and then I go and look at self checkout. And this was at a Food Basics. And there's two staff watching so nobody steals. There's one checkout open, and it's the express checkout, which means no more than 12. And there's a lineup of 10 to 8 people to get involved because no real cashiers were open. And then you look
Yeah.
at retail and it says, oh, loss prevention is through the roof because everybody's stealing. I think many people don't deliberately steal. I think it's just they don't know what the hell they're doing. How does a 65 or 75-year-old senior citizen know how
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
type in the code for bananas and know the difference between organic? The cashiers
Hmm.
get trained on this. How much training does a consumer get to go through the self checkout?
Yeah. Yeah.
In
Yeah, it's
terms of,
funny.
I remember the first time I went to a McDonald's drive through was with my father, and I'm one of six. He gets to the window and he gets the price and he goes, I think there's a problem with this. And the person in the window goes, what do you mean, sir? And he goes, well, my kids are eating this food in my car. You're charging me the same thing. No one's cleaning up after me. So I should have a discount because I'm not eating inside your restaurant. That's the
Yeah.
Indian mentality, right? What are you doing? Like everything is a negotiation, right? When we first came
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And it's
They're
like,
like, sorry, sir, you can't negotiate prices in the McDonald's drive-through.
yeah, like no one gave my dad the memo, but he had a very valid point. Like our
Hmm.
price is going down because I'm checking out myself. Or if you look at Walmart's closing stores, Target's closing stores, like, Canadian retail is very much a monopoly because consumers are saying, first of all, I'm buying less or whatever the case may be. And secondarily, theft is through the roof.
Hmm.
And now they're hiring more people to stop stealing and security because they really don't understand consumer behavior. How are people going to react to what you're doing beyond just you think you're saving money? How do people feel that they have to now get their groceries, bag their own groceries, and check out? So, what's happening? Highland Farms is an independent. Highland Farms still has bags, and Highland Farms has all the checkouts open.
Yeah.
So where are people going? That's what's happening. So, someone thought, oh, this is the future, and they're not really thinking about how consumers are going to react to it. And that's a big part. If you really understand consumer behavior, you'll be better able to predict demand than you
Yeah.
would if you don't, because you know where the market's going to change. Just like when people migrate from calculators to using their phone and from cameras to their phone and all these other behaviors, it's important to understand your consumer and the evolution of that consumer's needs over time, or you're going to see what you're seeing now. Every company is laying off and they're all like looking into space going, what happened? Well, because you're
Yeah.
more concerned about pushing product out the door without thinking about, is this what my customers need and want? And the
Yeah.
other side is, tell every one of my clients, the second that you don't solve your customers' problems better than anyone else is the day you close your doors.
Hmm.
Think about Uber and taxis,
Yeah.
and that was just the issue, that during the pandemic, Amazon and those guys blew up because you couldn't go to a store. But now
Hmm.
that you can, that's a consumer behavior issue. Why are people going to stay at home in front of their computers when they don't have to?
Yeah.
That was forced compliance. But given a choice, what happens? Like, think about Rogers and Bell when you can take your phone number with you. How many
Yeah.
people, when the handcuffs were taken off, switched providers?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, what happened? We lost so many of our customers. Yeah, because you handcuffed them for years and now they can leave. They're waiting for the opportunity to say, you know what,
Yeah.
later for you, we're out of here.
That's funny too. You really see the human nature through how people behave and like or consumers behave because like when you force somebody to do something, there's that whole reverse psychology thing where they want to do the exact when you tell somebody not to do something, they want to do that more. And when you strap somebody down, you force people into their homes because of these restrictions, right? Because of this, worldwide pandemic. It's interesting to see how opposite they go versus staying in their ways. Do you think it's also the whole thing of people liking to go out after the pandemic? Do you think that I feel like it changed? Well, not I shouldn't say I feel like it's I feel like it's different between age groups as well. Like I've met like my younger cousins, right? They were like between the ages of 2 and 6 when the pandemic first happened. And it's like they have a completely different perspective. They didn't know a world before that, right? They're too young. And now they're like, it's interesting to see how that's just their norm. And now this is weird for them going back outside, right? Like everything is going outside, back to how it
Yeah,
was beforehand.
that's a good point. They don't have a point of reference,
Hmm.
to your point. But now humans are social beings. They're
Yeah.
designed to be interactive and to move and not to be stationary and sit in front of your computer the whole time. That's why, companies sold out of things like bicycles and weights and all these other things. And I think once the pandemic was over, people reconnected with what they were missing. Even families taking more local holidays, not traveling as much, buying, bikes or whatever. I think that, the pandemic changed people. I really am interested to see what students are going to be like that spent, grade 11, 12, and whatever, 10, 11, and 12 during the
Yeah.
pandemic and then came to university. I do see that a lot of social skills have been put on the back burner. Students, are just now starting to come out and have a voice, whereas they were really shy. And I think, just being online, it's a different vernacular because you're so up close and personal versus in a classroom and you're 10 feet away from someone. It's a very different thing.
Yeah.
And I think it consumers, the population in general, it's going to affect every demographic differently. And I think
Mhm.
part of the older generations are going to think, what do I do if it happens again? So many parents are like, okay, if this happens again, I want to have more computers at home. But then think about what we did in the classroom for VR. How many
Mhm.
parents would have embraced a $500 headset and put all of your classes on that because there's no distractions and you don't need a computer? Just press the button and
Yeah.
there's your module. Like, I think
Yeah.
that the biggest threat is traditional education, that I think in some cases technology will outperform the classroom that
Yeah.
came about in the 1500s, and it was meant to teach people a task so they could fuel the manufacturing labor force.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everything is teach to test and everybody learns the same thing, and go into your jobs and spend the whole class writing notes on a chalkboard. I don't agree with the way high school and grade school is taught. I think they need
Mhm.
to evolve and adapt.
Yeah. That's something that I find interesting because my perspective is I have my own personal experience, right, within high school and elementary, middle school. But I also have my mom's perspective, being a kindergarten teacher for 20 plus years, helping out in a classroom. When I'm there in a class, I'm like, why is this only this sort of learning environment afforded just to children under 5 years old?
Right.
Where it's an open, like my mom, the way she teaches is it's all about play.
Hmm.
So we sit down, we all learn to sit down when it's time to sit down. But when we're working, you don't have to sit at the desk, write it with a pencil. You can go read a book, go in the library section, go in the playhouse and sit down and write. As long as you're working, kids like to work in different ways. People like to work in different ways. But, and in going through school, you're forced into whatever,
Right.
mold, depending on the teacher, right? Some teachers
Hmm.
try their best, like yourself, trying to change that. Um,
Hmm.
but that's something I find it's like, why not? Why wouldn't we? Why is that only for children? Because I feel like that just kills creativity in people, right?
It it's a teach to test mentality. And I think that, the reason why students get the summer off was because during the agricultural age, they needed their kids to, for the harvest. That was the reality. That's why the summers are
Yeah.
off. Like,
Yeah, I heard
and,
that.
teaching was done to produce a labor force, for the masses. It wasn't
Mhm.
done for the elites. So I think now that the world has changed, I think if the textbook companies decide to leverage VR and an immersive environment, I think there's a lot of parents that would be embracing like what happens in Norway and Sweden, where you put kids on a bus with VR screens, and then all of a sudden you have dinosaurs poke their head through the window, even though they could be in Oslo, Norway. And then the
Yeah,
next
yeah.
time you look out the window and you're in the pyramids or you're in a bunker and you're experiencing what the World War was like. I think education has to come out of the classroom to more experiential learning. And that's why
Yeah.
I'm so happy that when you guys had to go out and look at a store, I know I could see your faces. You thought I was insane. It's like, wait, what?
We're like,
You
what?
want us to go to a VR store? This has
Yeah.
never happened before. But then when you got there and then you're thinking about consumer behavior and the colors and the psychology and the assortment and the lighting, it's like, okay, now I get it. Like the
Hmm.
smells and everything else. And then you probably notice so much more when you go to any retail or restaurant or anything
Exactly.
else. You're
Yeah.
noticing things, about what makes people feel powerful or powerless depending on assortment and choice. And you see, like, even in retail, the lower income, less powerful segments of society require the most variety in almost every category, whether it's
Hmm.
soup or salty snacks or candy. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. So I think that's what's interesting. But again, to go back to, I got to prepare students for the world they're going to graduate into. How are you going to navigate that and continue to excel in life personally and professionally? I think that's the goal.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, that's all the questions I had for you today. Uh, I know I've kept you for much for much longer than we planned, but
It's
I really
okay.
do
Just
appreciate it.
No problem. I mean, the conversation was good, and I have a bit of a buffer. I got to be somewhere soon, but that's okay. I still have enough time, and I promise I'll stay within the speed limit. Although I got to tell you a story. When I was 16 and I got my license, I got pulled over for speeding, and the cop said, "You know, you were exceeding the limit." And I said to him, I said, "Well, you know, by definition, a limit is something you can approach but never reach. So how could I exceed it?" And he looked at me through the window and he
He's like,
goes,
what?
just go and slow down."
It's like, stop using some math terminology with me right now.
Exactly. He goes, just go and slow down. I said, okay,
It's
fine.
hilarious. Thank
So
you
I
so
start,
much
I
for
start,
coming on. Yeah.
you're welcome. Well, have a great weekend and rest of the day. And thanks for this opportunity. And do keep in touch. And hopefully, maybe I'll see you in my branding class. You signing up for branding?
Yes, I've been planning out my courses, and that's definitely on the list of what I
Take
want to do.
branding and strategic marketing communications because 457, you'll do a digital marketing audit.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that at the end. Yes,
And
that's
then
very
take
interesting.
sales management in the spring. And we spend a Saturday at a distribution warehouse and understand how supply chains work.
Cool. There's
So
your
we did
experiential learning right there.
right there. It was a nightmare trying to get the bus, but we did it. And we took the MBAs and the undergrads on a bus out to a warehouse in
Oh,
Scarborough.
field trip.
Field trip. It was so much fun. The kids were so excited. It was
Yeah.
great. But anyway, have a great rest of the day. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yes, of course. Thank you for coming on again.
Oh, you're
And
welcome.
yeah, yeah. So thank you guys for listening. Once again, thank you to Professor Inez Blackburn for coming on. If you like this episode, please give it a like. Save it, download it, add it to your playlist, whatever. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. If you want to hear more about updates and future plans for the podcast, follow us on Instagram at the.way podcast. And yes, thank you for listening and hope to see you guys next week.